Brexit. And plenty of people who are worried about the value of the pound are the very same people who 6 months ago thought the pound was overvalued. So they're just making political capital out of this because it's convenient to do so.
Well, you can't argue with the fact that the stock exchange is
falling.
I'm not arguing. And you can't argue with the fact that companies like Rolls-Royce and
people
Hitachi
don't like
and
uncertainty.
others...
You're absolutely right.
Businesses don't like uncertainty. Look, I was in Essex recently talking to a small business owner. He said, I have put any plans for investment, any plans for employing more people on hold until I know what is happening on the 23rd of June.
You and I cut our political teeth in the 1980s. I think you're slightly younger than me. But
Thank you.
I mean, Margaret Thatcher, you will remember, Margaret Thatcher reduced taxes to stimulate growth. She generated more revenue for the Treasury by doing so. Why would you think that it would be a good idea to raise taxes? I mean, you and George Osborne are supposed to be Conservatives, but you know Margaret Thatcher's, are you?
That's for other people, obviously, to decide. But look, the point is, we as Conservatives don't want to. Well, I'm not going to pass opinion about whether I'm a Margaret Thatcher or not. That's definitely for other people to decide. But we as Conservatives do not want to put taxes up. This Chancellor has, over time, he's frozen fuel duty, he's cut corporation tax, he's cut income tax by raising, obviously, the threshold that people can keep more of their own money. Those are exactly the things that we want to be doing. We do not want to be introducing this emergency budget. But if there is a vote to leave, all the respected economists have said there will be an economic shock. Even Andrew Lillico, who is supporting, I think, the Brexit campaign, has said there will be an impact on the economy.
Short term.
Well, but what the IFS figures are saying today, actually, it's not just, it affects what's called the structural deficit. So it's not just something where we end up borrowing more and having higher borrowing that we can then grow our way out of. This is something that is permanently affecting the British economy. That's not a responsible thing to leave the British people with, given all the hard work they've done these last 6 years.
Let me go back to this, the parliamentary majority here. You have a majority of 12, I think it is, in the House of Commons. The SNP won't support this budget. The Labour Party won't. There may be some Blairite MPs that do, but most of them won't support it. The Liberal Democrats won't support it. It doesn't take many Conservative MPs not to support it for it to go down. That would mean the Chancellor of the Exchequer losing his job, wouldn't it?
Well, it's not about one job. It's about lots of jobs that are affected by this. And it's not about... Look, one of the tiresome things...
It's a political reality.
Look, one of the tiresome things about this whole campaign has been this whole debate about personalities, about party leaders, about so-and-so versus so-and-so, about whether it's the Chancellor. Today, you've seen two very different chancellors, Chancellor and a former Chancellor, different parties, different ways of running the economy, both saying the same thing. So it doesn't matter which Chancellor we have. The fact is that actually any responsible Chancellor is going to have to make these tough decisions. And that's what we're seeing actually with the Vote Leave campaign today, saying they don't know what they would do. In fact, they probably do nothing. And having been a Treasury Minister...
Well, I'm not really interested in what Vote Leave is saying today. I'm interested in what the Chancellor of the Exchequer is saying. And I think he's being entirely loose with the facts here. I think that he is saying that he would conduct an emergency budget, which he knows he couldn't ever get through the House of Commons. So the only reason that he can be putting this forward is because he wants to scare people into voting to remain. Now, that may work, but I have a much higher view of the British people than that.
Well, I have a very high view. I have a very high view of the
innate... Well, you're hiding it well, I have to say.
Well, I have a very high view of the innate good sense of British people, and that's why I think they're going to vote to remain next week. But I think they would also... I tell you what, I think the criticism would be enormous if there was a vote to leave, and then it became clear the sense of the economic shock, the difficult decisions we have to take, the areas of public spending that we have protected as a government could no longer be protected. I think people would say, but you didn't tell us this. You didn't tell us that my school is not going to get the money that I thought. My hospital is not going to get the money.
Scare tactics. That's all you can do, isn't it? It's all you can do is bring out these scare stories. Well, you know as well as I do that people's schools are not run by the EU and have nothing to do with the EU.
But you're missing the point. And I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, Ian, but the point is that leaving the EU causes an economic shock, causes our economy to shrink, there's less taxes, and then there is less...
In your view, there is no actual empirical evidence that would happen.
9 out of 10 economists have said there would be an adverse economic impact.
Do you remember the 364 economists in 1981 that said Margaret Thatcher's economic policies would lead to 5 million unemployed? They were wrong then, weren't they?
Well, I don't, because I was 9 at the time, so strange enough I wasn't reading the newspaper letters at the time, but I do know about the letter. But the important thing is there is nobody on the other side of the argument saying there would be no adverse economic impact.
Let me just remind our listeners that you can actually watch us, if you would like to, on our Facebook Live page or at lbc.co.uk. Just sticking on this for a moment, this is a bit of a dead cat strategy, isn't it? It's a sort of classic Linton Crosby. I know he's not involved in the campaign, but if you talk about scary tax rises, it'll stop people talking about immigration and how the Remain side has absolutely no answer to controlling immigration.
No, I mean, look, we can debate immigration. I'm very happy. You just talked about the positives, and I'd also like to talk about the positive case for staying in the EU. Obviously, today's news particularly is about this budget, but I go back to the point. If we would not be responsible as government ministers who have a clear position to remain in the EU, if we did not warn people about the consequences.
And you've done nothing else for the last 3 months.
No, that's not entirely true. We have talked about the positives as well. We've talked about the benefits we get from cooperation within the EU, the things that we are able to do together, the fact that our allies want us to stay as members of the EU, the access to the single market, the growth in our economy. But I think we would be wholly irresponsible if we did not make clear what the consequences are.
Let's say we vote to remain a member of the EU. How many extra migrants will come to this country, say, by 2030?
Look, I can't predict any numbers, but what I can tell you is that the Prime Minister has negotiated, obviously in February, a deal which means that we are able to apply an emergency brake to EU immigration and also to make sure that those who do come are not able to claim benefits from day one. I think that's very important. But look, this is part of, as I say, a rather overall nasty, mean-spirited view about those who come here.
No, it's not, because you fought an election in 2005, as I did, under campaign posters which said it's not racist to talk about immigration,
and
it isn't.
It's not. But have I used that word? I haven't used that word. You used the word.
Well, you used a similar word, saying sort of there's a nasty tone or something to this.
But there has been a nasty tone to this. And actually, I feel very sorry for people
But it's partly nasty.
Who have come here.
It is partly nasty because people know that they can't believe a word your government says on immigration promises. When you fought the last election saying there would be tens of thousands coming into this country, and we now know it's actually about 350,000. Now, I'm the last person to say that we should stop immigration, but I'm the first person to say don't fight an election on a manifesto promise that you know, and you all did know, that you could never deliver on.
But we still very much, look, it's very much an ambition.
It's an ambition now. It's not a promise, is it? It was a promise in the manifesto.
Well, I can't remember the exact wording, but we do absolutely still want to bring it down.
But you can't while we're staying in the EU, because you cannot control the number of people coming into this country from the EU.
We can when we apply the emergency brake, which is what the Prime Minister negotiated in February. But we are still going to have people coming here from both the EU and from overseas. And we gain enormously. I mean, the trouble with this debate, you want to talk about the positives. Well, actually, look at my area of education. 200,000 students taking part in the Erasmus programme where there's an exchange. We have teachers coming here to teach modern foreign languages and other subjects. I think we gain enormously from people. What was Sarah Wilson's quote last week about migrants? If you come across a migrant in the NHS, they're more likely to be treating you than to be in the queue in front of you. This is the sort of proper debate about this subject that we need to have, not some sort of bogus claims from the other side, the Vote Leave side, that somehow we're going to stop, it's all going to stop if we were to leave. Because they know that's not true, because one of the things, and of course we're not clear about whether they want to have access to a single market or not, but if we do have access to a single market after a vote to leave, we would have to accept free movement of people. That's what Norway and others have had to do.
You said earlier that you thought that there have been too many personal insults in this debate. Would you like to tell that to your colleague Amber Rudd, who was quite disgraceful in the things she said against Boris Johnson in the debate last week?
Well, I didn't actually say that. What I said was there had been too much of a focus on...
Okay.
Look, can I just finish what I was saying? I just said there was too much focus on personalities. But I think actually what Amber was saying, I thought she was great on the debate. I thought she was robust. It was great to see women out there. And I heard earlier on, you've got Andrea and Harriet Harman coming in. That's great, to have more voices out there making the case on either side of the campaign.
But what's it got to do with the price of fish, whether you want to be driven home by Boris Johnson from a party or not?
Well, but it's something that was obviously said in a debate, and it's very much been something that, as I say, she said at the end of the
well, it was pre-planned. It was a line fed to her by Downing Street.
I have no idea why you would say that.
Well, would you like to be driven home by Boris Johnson at any point in your life?
I don't think that's on offer. I can't imagine after this campaign Boris would be offering to drive me home.
She effectively sacked herself from Boris Johnson's first cabinet, didn't she, in that debate?
Well, there's an awful lot of ifs and buts in that sentence, OK? So I think we've got a great Prime Minister, and he's going to carry on being Prime Minister after a vote to remain next week.
Well, if there isn't a vote to remain, though, and I mean, let's try and be as serious as we can on this, because it is an incredibly important thing for the country. if there is a Brexit vote, and I think you would accept that there is a possibility of that, you may not believe that it's going to happen, but it could do. We know now that David Cameron would have resigned if the Scottish independence referendum had been lost. We know that. Do you not think that the European vote is a much bigger issue than the Scottish independence referendum? I'm not minimising that at all. But he wouldn't have a choice but to go, would he? Because his whole policy would be in tatters.
Well, the Prime Minister has been very clear that he wouldn't go. He would accept the will of the British people. And to be honest with you, I think you couldn't have a better person in terms of knowing exactly who the personalities are in the EU and leading on the negotiations than the Prime Minister. You know, he has worked with them for the last 6 years.
I can see that as an argument in the sense that he knows all the personalities, he's built up relationships with them and all the rest of it. But I'm not sure whether the country would stand for it, really. And in the end, if he hasn't got the confidence of the British people to stay as Prime Minister, he would have no alternative but to quit.
But there's an awful lot of ifs in that sentence.
Well, of course there are. I mean all of this is about hypotheticals, isn't it?
Well, apart from, obviously, I'll go back to the issue about if we remain, we know what we are getting.
But we're talking about if we don't.
We've got a Prime Minister, we've got a Chancellor, we know where we're headed.
We both recognise there is at least, according to the betting markets now, a 40% chance of a Brexit vote. I think it's probably a little bit higher than that. But so I don't think it's wrong of us to try to want to work out what would happen. Now, none of us can be certain, but you have to accept that there would be a possibility that the Prime Minister would think, well, I've got no alternative.
Look, I'm not going to speculate. The Prime Minister couldn't have been clearer in what he has said. If there were a vote to leave, I think it's unlikely to happen, but obviously it's dependent on the voting of the British people next Thursday. Then he would stay and lead the negotiations and trigger the Article 50 process.
So whatever happens, Cameron and Osborne stay in position. Do you not think that there are going to be more than 50 of your colleagues that are so irritated, so angry by what George Osborne has done today, that those letters would be going into Graham Brady to seek a leadership contest, or a vote of confidence, rather?
Look, yeah, I just don't think that speculation is helpful. I mean, I think in my 6 years in Parliament, I've learnt very much not to second-guess my colleagues. And I think the important thing is that we all make the case for remaining, in my case, until the close of polls next Thursday. And then we deal, obviously, with the consequences.
Another if coming up, if he did quit at any point in the next 2 or 3 months, would you be a candidate for the leadership? You have made clear in the past, I remember our conversation at the Conservative Party conference, that you think a woman should stand. Well, why not admit that you'd actually quite like a crack at it?
Well, look, not accepting the premise of your question, which is that I think there'll be a vote to remain and I think the Prime Minister will stay in place. But I have said that at the appropriate moment in the course of this Parliament, if there is a vacancy, then I do think that it would be great to see a woman in the final two. But that is a matter, again, and I don't want to second guess my colleagues in the Parliamentary Party, but that's a matter for the Parliamentary Party, obviously, in terms of who they
But would you like that woman to be you?
Well, but that's a matter. Look, I mean, it would be an enormous
privilege.
It is a matter. Look, that's a matter for them, but it's an enormous privilege. It would be an enormous privilege to be anywhere near the leadership of the party that I've been in for 27 years. But that's going to be a matter for others to decide. To be honest with you, all this speculation is obviously unhelpful and designed to distract. We have to focus, and I think people listening and people out there want us all to be focusing on the case for remaining in my case, before 10 p.m. next Thursday night.
Michael Gove has said he would sacrifice his cabinet position for a Brexit vote. Would you sacrifice yours for a Remain vote?
Look, I love my job as Education Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities. Whether you're in Cabinet or a Minister is completely within the gift of the Prime Minister. But I do feel very strongly that it would be a huge mistake for the country to vote to leave the EU.
Why won't the Prime Minister or the Chancellor take part in any head-to-head debates? Because if they're so confident of their position, you'd have thought they'd have wanted to take the fight to the British people and actually be cross-examined by sort of the other side, and yet they will not do it. I think that's an abdication of leadership. You're happy to do head-to-head debates. Many of your cabinet colleagues have done. Why does the Prime Minister not do them?
Look, it's not a conversation I've had with the Prime Minister. I think he was very good at the head-to-head debates in the general election campaign last year, and I know the Chancellor took part in, I think, the Chancellor and Shadow Chancellor and other
ones. Didn't do head-to-head debates.
But, well, I think you can't accuse the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of not being out there talking to people, taking questions.
Well,
taking questions of a whole variety.
Today, can't I?
Well, Well, having said that, I know the Chancellor isn't sitting here, but he did a major interview this morning.
He did
questions
and he will
answers.
be with us next Tuesday or Wednesday. Mark my words.
Questions and answers after his speech today. But look, the Prime Minister has done interviews with leading broadcasters, more to come, and most importantly, with members of the public, who are the ones who are going to be voting on the 23rd of June.
Can I ask you something completely unrelated to this? And I don't mean to bounce you on this at all, but Philip Green was appearing before the Select Committee this morning. I caught a bit of that. I don't know if you did. Do you think we should still call him Sir Philip?
Well, look, I think, to be honest with you, there's an independent committee that makes those decisions. They will, I suspect, have been watching today what's been happening. I haven't seen the detail of what he said. I've only
But
caught
with what
the
you know
headlines.
about his conduct so far, you will have read all about it. A lot of our listeners, we're going to be talking about this after 6 o'clock, by the way, a lot of our listeners are really angry about the way he appears to have behaved. Could you not have a personal view as to whether he should have his knighthood stripped?
Well, I really would need to go and see exactly what he has said today. But I think the truth is that obviously those who have honours have to recognise that the British people, like those of us in public life, expect a certain standard of conduct. And we've seen that the committee, in the case of Fred Goodwin, is that sort of action. But I really would have to go and see exactly what Philip Green has said and evidence to the committee today.
Nicky Morgan, thank you very much indeed for joining us today and stepping into the breach so well. We are going to be taking your calls, your reaction to George Osborne's so-called emergency budget. What do you think of the very fact that he's even said all of this today? Do you think it maybe marks the end of his political career? That's what a lot of Conservative MPs are telling me. They say he needn't bother standing for the leadership in the future because he will get about 10 votes. Well, you can only speculate on that. And that's the problem here, that so much of this is speculation, but we all have to form our own judgments. What judgment have you formed after today's events, with George Osborne appearing with Alistair Darling and saying there would be tax rises and spending cuts because there would be a 30 billion black hole if the UK voted to leave the EU? Give me a call now. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. I'm Ian Dale. This is LBC. It's 5:30, and Simon Conway has the news headlines.
The Education Secretary has told LBC the Chancellor is not scaremongering by threatening tax rises and spending cuts if we vote to leave the EU. Dozens of MPs are threatening to block an emergency budget in the event of a Brexit. Police have used tear gas in Lille to disperse fans after trouble following the Russia-Slovakia match at Euro 2016. Earlier, Russia's foreign ministry summoned the French ambassador